Well, hello and welcome to this next Clarity Parents Chat. The topic we're going to discuss today is youth and technology. Is it time for a reset? We look forward to an engaging conversation with our guest speaker, Dr. Joshua Essery. This talk is a production of Clarity Child Guidance Center, a nonprofit treatment center solely dedicated to helping children 3 to 17 with their mental health. Clarity is located in the San Antonio Medical Center and provides inpatient and outpatient services to several thousand of children every year. You can read more about the center at claritycgc.org and about children's mental health on our prevention and education website, oneinfiveminds.org. Now, before we start, I just want to remind you all of a few technical details. The webinar will end at 11:30, including a 10-minute Q&A at the end. This talk is recorded, but none of the names of the attendees will show in the recording to protect your privacy. That's also why we are not taking live questions, but we encourage all of you, if you have questions for Dr. Essery, to post those questions in the chat space at any time during the talk. Of course, this event is purely educational and is by no means an attempt to provide counseling online. Now, Dr. Joshua Essery is joining us from his office, where he provides counseling to children and families, but also is responsible for the supervision and training of psychology residents at Clarity Child Guidance Center. His clinical interests include psychodynamic psychotherapy, therapy, personality assessment, interpersonal group therapy, existential psychology, and the integration of psychological and spiritual perspectives. Dr. Essery is also the father of 3 young children. Dr. Essery, welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Well, it's our pleasure. And, of course, it's very timely. It's not going on today and in the past few weeks through technology. But also, we've seen in the past years a huge growth in use of technology among teenagers. I mean, I was just reading some data, and some research said that in 2018, almost 50% of teenagers were constantly engaging in social media, which was about double what it was 3 or 4 years before that. So it's a very radical shift, and it's developing at a very rapid pace. Now, what would you say are some of the main ways that you think this is impacting children and teenagers?
Well, first of all, I appreciate the question because there's certainly positive and negative impacts, and so it's not all just one way. And technology is such a broad category that encompasses things like gaming and social media, as you put it, but it also includes things like FaceTime and ways that we can video conference through Zoom and do things like we're doing now, which allow for more connection. So we're talking about a very broad topic that is changing quickly. And so the reality is we don't really know every way that it's impacting us, and it's moving so quickly, it's even hard to know what we mean by technology anymore. What I'd like to talk about is more as a clinician, some of the ways that I think about technology and how it impacts kids. The first is I think about the idea of identity and self-esteem and body image. And I think that there are really significant ways that technology can impact kids with that. Things like, who am I, and is who I am based on what I have in terms of the types of technology I have, or how many followers I have, or how many likes on my last post that I got, or how long and how many snap streaks that I have. Do I need to somehow change my appearance or my profile to quote unquote look like that other person or the person that I think I'm supposed to be or should be, rather than the person that I really feel that I am? Or do I need to start portraying my life in a way that would have other people like me, rather than portray my life as it really is? So we're getting essentially kids socialized into almost marketing themselves sometimes, rather than having a genuine expression of who they are that's consistent with how they feel inside. And technology is really where they get their feedback and their prompts for this. And so I think there are some significant impacts on identity, self-esteem, and body image that kind of come out of that. The other piece is relationship development and attachment is now being mediated through screens. And so if you think about this, even from the very early years, we're now using, and have been for a while, frankly, but it's getting more sophisticated, the types of technology informed toys that we're even putting in front of our infants and toddlers. And obviously, infants and toddlers are now using FaceTime and kind of connecting with family members through that, which is really, really a positive thing. It's great. The thing that really is a question for me is, what is this doing to the need for physical stimulation and physical soothing and learning how to use motor skills and to develop motor skills? There's something about technology that keeps us in our mind sometimes, and doesn't really engage our bodies as much as having a in-person interaction. I've had some experiences clinically where kids have parents who maybe are, in a different city or country and haven't seen them very long. And it's like the young kid sees the technology as something more concrete. And so the phone is daddy rather than daddy is talking through the phone. And that's getting what I'm talking about, that the technology itself is somehow becoming a thing that kids attach to as much as a person. There's things like later with relationship development, like how does a kid who can theoretically begin to develop independence, which means they have to be challenged to do things on their own, do that effectively if their parent is at the touch of a screen and can help them solve their problems? There can be some positives to that, but it can also limit some of the independent challenges that foster development. And so there's kind of a question about how technology is interacting with kids' independence. The other piece is with relationship development, you think about things like empathy. Why does it really matter if you unfriend someone? Why would you care if you say something derogatory, or even if other kids on a game are telling another kid, you might as well go kill yourself? Why should kids care about other people that they're interacting with online that they don't know and may never see? And so it really poses a challenge for our perspective taking and taking empathy for others, and really understanding that the screen is there, but there are really true people, real people who have real feelings on the other side of the screens. The last area that I'll highlight is emotional development. Let's be honest, it's just really hard to put down the screens. And that's for parents and children alike. But oftentimes kids will feel like, I need to be doing something. I need to be doing something on technology. I need more of it, and I need to figure out how to do it faster. There's issues like the fear of missing out. So I can't put the screen down because I'm going to miss something or be excluded for something. And it makes it really difficult to learn skills to deal with things that many of us had to deal with when we grew up without technology, which was, how do you deal with states like boredom? How do you learn how to sit in silence and, be with your own thoughts and make some use of that? How do you learn how to wait and have patience and even anticipate things without needing them to happen right now? And so, those are some examples, but the main three categories are relationship development, emotional development, and then self-esteem and identity. That's the way that I think about technology impacting us.
Wow, that's a great setup for this conversation, because each of those could lead to so many more exploration, right? And issues.
Very complex.
And I'm thinking about you're talking about identity. And I think that's really key there, because indeed we will have a tendency to create this image of self, right? Or not. You're saying that basically technology is accelerating, facilitating this tendency. do you see a way that actually in your clinical practice, where this becomes actually a clinical issue, this false portraying of self, and how does that, what does that lead to?
So it certainly can be a clinical issue. It can create sort of an ideal self that ultimately is unattainable and is really kind of an ingenuine expression of who the child uniquely is in temperament and personality. And so there can be a striving to be someone that you can't be, which can create a great deal of self-doubt. It can also create a great deal of anxiety because you're feeling pressure to somehow live up to this ideal that ultimately is unattainable. And it creates a sense of self that somehow is dependent upon a social media audience, or an audience that you're at least perceiving as there through technology. And so how do you get the sense of validation and praise and social feedback? You do it through things that ultimately I don't think are really reliable. I think most of us want our children and our adolescents to develop into a sense of identity and a sense of self that is genuine to who they are temperamentally, that is consistent with their own internal values, and that somehow has a consistency that isn't easily, impacted by who they're around or who they're receiving feedback from. We want our kids to have a strong core.
Yeah, and that's a relationship with others in a real relationship type of right. It's if kids who are have a solid environment, who can develop by being with others in a real kind of relationship, not virtual.
Yeah, and certainly the issue of having an ideal self that you're trying to live up to is a task and a struggle in person relationships as well. It's just technology takes it to another level. You have the ability to control an image and also receive kind of feedback and likes that are, I think, a little bit more concrete.
Yeah, and you talk also about relationships, and I think that's also a huge area of thought and conversation about how there's a big difference between the way you engage with people, and you talk about empathy. I think that's huge, because we see that. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of conversation that could be difficult and stressful, right? And so, and people tend to, it's easy, like you said, to just cut off and have a real discussion.
There's an author by the name of Sherry Turkle. Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me, Gerard?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I can hear.
Sorry. So there's an author by the name of Sherry Turkle. There's an author by the name of Sherry Turkle who has two books that I think highlight some of the issue with empathy. One is called Alone Together: How We Demand More from Technology and Less from Each Other. And the other is called Reclaiming Conversation. And I think that it's very difficult, and we don't fully know how this works, how we really understand other people and other people on the other end of a screen, why it is we would care about them, and how it is that we engage genuinely in a way that demonstrates that we understand them and care about them while using technology. The other piece of it is that we can stay more connected because of technology. So we've learned this a lot through COVID, that while we've at times had to quarantine or stay very socially distanced, that technology has been in many ways a saving grace that has helped us to stay, connected. So it's a complicated thing.
Yeah. It's a matter of how do you balancing a balancing act. But you talk about this engaging with others and the way technology. I mean, we don't see we don't see the body language the same way through a Facebook or FaceTime or a Zoom call than if you were in person. The other part is that you talk. I mean, we talk about affirmation. How can you provide affirmation through digital interaction in a genuine way? And do you see that as a maybe a must in terms of correcting the challenges of the technology?
So I think that there's still a larger question about um, how much information sharing through technology is actually effective at demonstrating any kind of genuineness.
Yeah.
And I just personally have questions about what types of conversations or what types of information can really impact people via things like social media, which I think the whole issue about reclaiming conversation kind of highlights that. So can it happen? I'm sure it can, but it seems to me that because of some of the limitations with technology we're talking about, it's just very difficult to have a genuine conversation or sharing of information on something that's a social media platform. I mean, our time right now is pretty well demonstrating that in terms of politics and that type of thing.
And so you mentioned COVID as well. What's a new twist because of COVID now? You see in terms of people you work with, in terms of how did that affect their world, and in terms of how did the technology and impacted them?
Well, it has become, a necessity rather than a choice anymore. And it's, if you think about families having rules around screen time or, how do you do that now when essentially school socialization is mediated through screens? And so it's really disrupted, I think, the way that families can really think about screens in general. And just because of the mandatory increase in screen time, the reality is we have fewer options for safe activities outside of the home, which again puts us on the screens more. And understandably, and I think it's a positive thing that we have the opportunity to socialize more through tech. But technology is now literally, because of COVID, in the fabric of our kids' schools, our any kind of community involvement that we're in, churches, communities of faith, and our family. It's the way that many of us stay connected with our extended family. And so we've been kind of forced into this without really choice, and also without really understanding fully how it impacts us and how it changes things for us.
Yeah, you talked about anxiety, how technology can bring anxiety and stress, and I think that's something we see. The positive thing I've seen is that there there was kind of almost a reaction to that, where we see family in our neighborhood walking together. We see even youth walking around, walking the dog, and but they still have the phone on their earbud, listening to something, but it's still there is some trying to escape a little bit maybe because there's so much time spent on the computer for work and for studying today that maybe there's a silver line. Now, when would you say, when could parents know when there is a problem in general with technology? When they have sit and they're like, okay, we're gonna have a conversation or do something. What are some of the signals?
I'll put out a couple examples. I mean, obviously, it depends on the kid's age and the family, how the family was pre and post. But I think it's a sign there's something wrong if you as a parent, you don't know how to connect with your child anymore, and the only thing that seems to make them happy is the screen. Or if they become sort of irritable or emotional when they're not on screens, and it doesn't appear to have anything to do with a reason that makes sense to you about what's going on in the home or in the interactions. If you start to experience a lot of resistance in doing activities that don't involve screens, or even outright refusals, particularly if that other activity is something that the kid used to enjoy and used to like to do. That would be a good sign to pay attention to as well. As power struggles, if they're asked to give up their screens and that leads to anger displays or tantruming in younger children, or pouting that lasts more than a few minute kind of transition period, that's a signal that this isn't going well. If the child or teenager is not eating or doing hygiene activities because they want to stay on screens, that's a concerning sign. If you see them and they're really engrossed in maybe even you would say obsessed with one kind of interest on the screen, and they have a real hard time shifting interest, and they're just focused on that one thing, or that one game, or that one kind of app, that would be something to pay attention to. If the child is gaming or chatting or has friends with individuals that you don't know and that you don't kind of have a real world context to know them, and they're asking for personal information, and they're trying to get your child to engage with them, through text, and particularly sending personal information or pictures. If you become aware of that, that's a very concerning sign. If you find that your child is viewing content that's inappropriate, whether that be extreme violence or pornography, that's not okay as well. And then, if you see, kind of like we were talking about earlier, an adolescent's mood and self-image drastically shift, and it seems to be based on social media, that can be a concerning sign, as well as this, what I described before, like this need, I have to be on the screen, I have to play the game, otherwise I'm going to somehow miss something. Technology should really be a tool that our children learn how to use and benefit from. It shouldn't be something that our children are used by.
Absolutely. And I have a question, actually, a follow-up question on this situation. One of these situations, or any of these situations, could be a warning sign, an alarming sign for parents. The next question is, and I have a question from one of our participants: how do I get enough without him getting so angry and disrespectful? So it's like, how do we deal with that situation? Now how do I deal with a child, a teenager maybe, who becomes very angry when you try to change, to remove technology or limit technology?
Absolutely. So, as a parent myself, I can understand the reaction when something like that goes on. And the reality is, if you have a structure, you're consistent with that structure, and you're able to set limits consistently, the negative response and the tantruming and the angry reaction, it goes away over time. You can anticipate anytime you change things with a kid of any age, particularly if you're taking away something that they want to have, there's going to be a protesting period. And the most important thing is that the parent remains consistent and tries to get their kid, when they can, to talk with them about what they're feeling, so that the parent can understand, and maybe there can be an increased relationship built through that process. Two other things with that is, I think that the teen or the kid needs to know when they're going to get the technology back and how that is going to take place. I'm really a fan of having screen time, particularly screen time that's like gaming or something like that, be earned rather than just given. And additionally, I think one very important thing that parents must do is to engage in what's called shared attention, or activities that have shared attention with their kids. And so these are things where you are literally doing something together, hopefully that the child enjoys or likes, or is an interest that the child likes, and you're sharing attention and focusing on something together, which ultimately develops the relationship and develops the attachment. But you have to stick firm when when there's the protest period. If you give in, it will make it more likely that they will protest in the future, and it will be less likely that you're going to be able to set limits in the future without more extreme anger outbursts. If you think about it almost from like a conditioning standpoint, the child is punishing the parent through their anger. And if the parent behaves in a way to give the child what they want, what is happening there is the child is learning that anger and outbursts ultimately are the most effective thing to get what they want.
And a couple of more follow-up questions. How important is it to explain the why behind your actions and the limitation? And the other one was, what's the reasonable limit or usage screen time for teenagers?
So the first piece about how important the why is, it depends on the age of the kid. Sometimes younger kids are not going to understand the why, and as most parents know, one why leads to 10 more. And so sometimes saying something simple like, because it's bad for your brain for you to spend that much time on whatever, and that's why, and this is what we're doing. Because engaging too much after that sometimes just feeds the anger and the frustration rather than making it kind of concrete. When you have older kids, I think the question becomes, are they genuinely seeking to understand why, or are they trying to engage you in a negotiation? If they're genuinely seeking to understand why and they're at a place where that conversation can take place, I think it's very appropriate to explain why it is you're doing what you're doing, particularly if it's around, things like restricting content that's not appropriate, particularly if it's around things like making sure they're interacting in a socially appropriate manner, and particularly if it's about things like helping them to understand that the relationships here matter too. And so we need to develop time and a space for that as well. I think that's really important. There was a second question that it was about the amount of time. So what I'll recommend is that the person who asked that question, there are two tools or resources. One is Google the American Academy of Pediatrics. They have a family media plan that they've got plenty of resources to read about the amount of screen time and also how to plan kind of for media and screen time in the family. The other is commonsensemedia.org. If you go to that website, right in the middle at the top, there's a Parents Need to Know tab. If you click on that, it talks about things like screen time as well as other frequently asked questions. It's got some really good information. I think the key thing to remember is not all screen time is the same. And so, if there's the reality that your kid is still in virtual school, obviously they're going to be engaging in screens for more time than maybe some of those tools might recommend. But I would think about how much screen time does the kid have in their free time and kind of focus there.
So American Academy of Psychiatry.
American Academy of Pediatrics, that's correct.
Right. And where was on that page, where was the place or the...
If you literally just Google the American Academy of Pediatrics, you can put media plan, or you can put screen time. Okay. Screen time. Yeah. It will pull up. It will be the first tab. I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Yeah, that's okay. That's great. Yeah. And then commonsensemedia.org. That sounds like two great resources for this. One of the attendees asked the name of the author that you mentioned again about conversations. Can you repeat that name?
Yes, her name is Sherry Turkle, and she, the last that I'm aware, is a professor at MIT, and she essentially has been writing about technology and psychology since the late 80s, I believe. She's got some really good resources that you can find just by Googling her name. She's got some, what are those called? TED Talks and things like that really kind of highlight some of her perspectives. I think she's a really onto some important concepts.
Nice. Now there's a lot going on in this field. We really touched on in a way on the surface, but some very important information there. Thank you, Dr. Essery. Again, we encourage people to do their own research. It wasn't a question about or therapists who are specialized in that. I don't know that any specialist, anyone is really a specialized in technology. Maybe it's a question you ask potential therapists if they have some expertise there. But
Yeah, for me, I consider this as a diversity variable. And so with every patient or client that I see, I try to understand their own culture.
yeah,
And I think technology and the way that the family interacts and the kid interacts with technology is sort of akin to a subculture or kind of a cultural influence. And so I think any therapist who's going to be mindful of context and really try to understand the family culture will include technology in that.
great. Well, thank you, Dr. Essery. Thank you for everyone who joined us today. I apologize for the small technology issues we had. But I hope you can join us next week. Next week, we will have a conversation about avoiding burnout in these days and how to do self-care as a parent. So I hope you can join us. And again, thank you and have a wonderful rest of the week.